It is once again the time of Hallows Eve, and if there's anything that's more scary than my upload schedule, it's horror games. So between Scream Fortress contracts and bouts with Lilith Mora, I decided to play something that would get me more into the mood for this spooky season. Today's game has spooky specters, scary ghosts, and a time slow mechanic before it was cool. Today we look at F.E.A.R. The year is 2025. The Armacham Technology Corporation, or ATC, has been messing with the dark side of science and has developed a series of clone soldiers called replicas that are all controlled by a single person named Paston Fettel. Seems, well, he's gone rogue. We play as Point Man. Sure, Point Man is a part of the US government's F.E.A.R program, which stands for First Encounter Assault Recon. Sure, Point Man is tasked with finding and taking out Fettel, which will deactivate all the clones. There's also a little ghost girl, and Fettel likes to eat people. Alright, cool. This should be a good start for some horror. Well, horror needs a good scene to have the scares in. So what does F.E.A.R have to offer? Well, there's a lot of office spaces and some labs. Occasionally a water treatment plant or an apartment complex. Nothing too noteworthy outside of a few events. Often we go into this dreamlike state where most of the scares are supposed to come from. The wikis have deemed this location as Almaverse. Usually these are to hint at plot points. They are a bit more memorable than the usual locations offered here. Well, what about the scares themselves? F.E.A.R might not actually be the best at that. It sure does try to be scary, but there's not much tension to it. Good horror builds anticipation and gives that feeling of not truly knowing what's around each corner. This game just goes boom. It makes a little static in your screen, whispers in your ear a little bit. I didn't really feel scared. And what is there to fear? Most of my problems have been dealt with the slim end of a gun. There was some disturbing imagery, but it was a mild disgust at best. Although not the horror one could hope for, they still provide a good sense of a supernatural environment. Something created by science, but not explained by it. And for a 2006 game, it doesn't look half bad. Now, I might be ragging on the game, so let's shift to a better aspect of the game. The gameplay. Gameplay can be boiled down into two sections, exploration and combat sections. Exploration is your downtime. Move around the area, find resources, discover lore, and solve some puzzles to progress forward. Resources can be guns that can be picked up or collected for ammo of your existing guns, grenades, health kits, bullet time or health upgrades, and armor kits. Lore can be collected from listening to messages on phones, downloading computer data, or encountering scripted events. Lastly, puzzles are usually straightforward. Find an alternate path, turn on some switches, standard puzzle stuff, nothing too crazy. The second section of gameplay is where I believe the meat to be. Combat. While exploring, you'll find yourself in an area that the replica soldiers will engage you in. Now, you could do things a little bit more quietly. A silent takedown won't alarm the group, but the game's stealth isn't perfect. I usually just shoot the first guy in the head, which is an instant kill if they aren't alerted to your presence. Then I just go loud. Now, going loud doesn't mean go crazy. You still need to be somewhat tactical about this. Cover is your friend, and luckily one of the mechanics of the game is a corner peek system. Grenades are useful to flush out enemies, or to create traps, since there are various different grenades to utilize. As for your gun options, you start with a pistol, and then you begin finding other guns like SMG, or a rifle, or a rocket launcher. There's a decent array to choose from, but of course, these have to be found off dead enemies or in the environment you explore. You can carry up to 3 guns at a time, so choose your favorite. Just don't choose the shotgun. And don't forget about the main mechanic that the game boasts, the bullet time mechanic. I say don't forget because I forgot half the game. Personally, it just wasn't worth using most of the time. Maybe a few times I used it on harder difficulties, but it just felt less fun to use it. Sure, it can be useful to make sure you land every single shot, but after a while it just wasn't as fun to use anymore. But maybe that's the point of it. Not to use constantly, but only to be used in dire situations that you need it. I think this mindset gives more value to the mechanic without bogging down the game as much. The enemies are majority replica soldiers who take cover, flank, throw grenades, and utilize various tactics to take you down. The normal soldiers have SMGs, rifles, and shotguns at times. There are some variations among the soldiers, like heavy armor units that are harder to take down, a power armor unit that have rockets or lasers, and even a cloaking unit that runs up and hits you and then runs away. Other enemy types are Armacam security detail that are much like the replicas and have access to auto turrets that activate when you get in range. The last enemy is the ghostly apparitions that you'll encounter later in the game. They just fly at you, nothing much to them. Now that the game is covered, I do need to make a note on something more external pertaining to the game. Since the game is relatively old, there is a few hiccups that have to be addressed before playing the game. At default, the game runs at 30 FPS. This seems to be something with the engine. First, you gotta change some of the graphic card settings to let the game understand that it's on a good computer and doesn't need to restrain itself. After that, there's an input-related bug that causes the game to slow down once again after a few minutes. Download a config file, and then it should be ready to go. With all that in mind, F.E.A.R is a fun little experience that I enjoyed playing. It might be a hassle to set up, but it is certainly worth the wait. The horror aspects might be lackluster, and the bullet time mechanic is somewhat useful, but there's still a lot to enjoy here. That's why I say that this game is silver-lined. There's a lot of good once you deal with the bad. Now I guess we can look at the DLC. Never mind.